Prime Minister Mark Carney will be at the summit tomorrow. Obviously, he'll be talking about trade with the U.S. What are you hoping to hear from him?
I'm hoping that we can all contribute to the path forward that means the least tariffs, ideally no tariffs, as quickly as possible.
The headlines are loud. Tariffs are coming. August 1st is the deadline. Canada and the United States are scrambling to reach a new trade deal. Steel, autos, agriculture, they dominate every headline. But in the middle of this storm, something's missing from the conversation. Something big. Energy. Canada's most vital export to the US. And yet, it's barely being mentioned. No press briefings, no public threats, no leaks. And in a negotiation as high stakes as this one, that kind of silence is never accidental.
I think Donald Trump is feeling pretty cocky right now, full of himself. Thinks he's got everybody coming to him. I'm going to actually say Canada's imports of softwood lumber or steel or whatever are a national security threat. I'm going to put more tariffs on. So,
as of now, most Canadian goods face a 25% tariff under the Trump administration's 2025 trade directive. On August 1st, that could rise to 35%. But energy, including oil, uranium, LNG, and hydropower, has stayed at 10%. It's one of the few categories that hasn't been pulled into the tariff crossfire. There's been no official announcement placing energy on or off the negotiating table. And yet, both countries are acting as if it's too sensitive to touch. For now. This silence is drawing attention because it suggests something deeper. Not that energy is off limits, but that it may be too valuable to risk in early talks. If this trade fight is a high-stakes game, then energy might just be the strongest card Canada holds. And that's exactly why it isn't being played. From Washington's side, touching Canadian energy too aggressively could backfire. The United States imports nearly 95% of its uranium, with Canada as its top secure supplier. That uranium feeds the country's nuclear reactors that are about to power a surge in AI-related data centers and clean energy grids. From Ottawa's side, making energy an early bargaining chip could invite dangerous demands. The Trump administration has already pushed for more access to Canada's telecom, banking, and agriculture sectors. Why give them a reason to ask for more? So instead of putting energy on the table, both sides are quietly leaving it just under it.
And then we're also looking to extend natural gas access into New Brunswick and support some of the assets that we have, like our LNG plant and our port in St. John that moves a lot of energy product. We also have critical mineral projects that contribute to Canada's defense.
While the federal government stays quiet, Canada's provinces are preparing the ground. In New Brunswick, Premier Susan Holt is pushing the Eastern Energy Partnership, a multilateral grid plan linking LNG, nuclear, and wind from Quebec to the Atlantic coast. St. John's Port is being upgraded, and new pipelines are under discussion to connect Western gas to Eastern export routes. Meanwhile, Saskatchewan is solidifying its role as a strategic uranium hub. Ontario is focusing on EV supply chains powered by domestic energy sources. None of these moves are explicitly linked to U.S. talks, but taken together, they form a clear pattern. Provinces are ensuring that if energy enters the trade equation, they'll be ready to use it on Canada's terms. Prime Minister Mark Carney is expected to join Canada's premiers this week in Huntsville. The focus will be U.S. trade, and the political stakes couldn't be higher. But barring a breakthrough, it's unlikely the final deal will be free of tariffs. More likely is a partial agreement, one that accepts tariffs on sectors like steel or telecom, while keeping energy untouched. Not as a gift, but as a calculated exchange. And if there's no deal by August 1st, then energy will become even more critical, not in speeches, but in supply chains, export routes, and quiet retaliatory decisions. Because sometimes the most powerful card in a negotiation is the one you never show.
Thing. China's influence on the world stage has been growing and America's has been declining. It seems to have accelerated in the last few months.
Trump's tariffs were supposed to make America stronger. Instead, they've exposed just how much leverage the country has already lost, not only in global trade, but in global leadership.
The numbers for the full year should have gone up. But because of tariffs, companies withdrew their guidance and left to their own devices. Wall Street cut numbers for the full year, expecting tariffs were going to take a big bite out of business.
President Donald Trump returned to office promising to finish what he started. Break global trade dependencies, revive American manufacturing, and force allies into reciprocal trade deals. His signature weapon? Tariffs. On April 2nd, what he called Liberation Day, the administration announced sweeping tariffs of 10 to 50% on over 100 countries. Canada faced 35%, the EU 30%, China 50%. But instead of forcing trade partners to fold, the strategy is falling flat. According to Morgan Stanley Investment Management, U.S. companies in Q2 2025 showed stronger than expected earnings. Not because tariffs helped, but because Wall Street had slashed expectations too sharply earlier in the year. Companies had withdrawn guidance out of caution, assuming tariffs would bite deep. But those fears didn't fully materialize. What did happen? Supply chains rerouted, costs shifted, and a wave of confusion left investors cautious. Tariffs didn't crash the markets, but they didn't boost domestic production either. Industrial growth remains sluggish. Input prices have edged up. The economic logic behind Trump's strategy is now under serious scrutiny.
I think that's right, Ali. Exactly right. I think if you were to look back at public opinion polling from the first Trump administration, you would also have seen the gap close between the United States and China on the global stage.
Wow. China is the world's largest producer of steel, of aluminum. They produce 2/3 of the world's electric vehicles.
While the economic results remain mixed, the geopolitical cost is becoming crystal clear. Longtime allies are walking away, not in anger, but in quiet disappointment. European officials now describe the U.S. as an unreliable partner. Trade talks with the EU have stalled. Japan and South Korea are signing independent energy deals with Canada, bypassing Washington. What's more, Trump's foreign policy choices, cutting USAID funding, slashing international education programs, and walking back diversity initiatives in universities, have eaten into America's soft power. According to Freedom House, the number of democracies worldwide has declined for 19 straight years. Trump didn't start that trend, but analysts say he's accelerating it. U.S. influence used to come not only from the dollar or the Pentagon, but from trust. That trust is eroding, and nothing is replacing it. As Washington raises walls, others are building bridges. China, once hesitant, now responds with full confidence. In April, Beijing imposed retaliatory tariffs as high as 84% on U.S. goods. It restricted rare earth exports, tightened import licenses, and deepened Belt and Road investments. Over $1 trillion has been pledged across Asia, Africa, and Latin America, with little U.S. competition in sight. Even more striking is Canada's response. After being hit with 35% tariffs, Ottawa didn't just retaliate with its own 25% levies. It went further. Prime Minister Mark Carney launched an economic realignment strategy, boosting trade with Mexico and the EU, slashing exposure to U.S. supply chains, and coordinating regional alternatives. Tourism from Canada to the U.S. dropped over 40% in June, according to international booking platforms. Some provinces banned American alcohol from public events, and Canadian consumers, quietly, began choosing differently. Trump's tariff-first doctrine was designed to project power. But in practice, it's revealed a painful truth. Power doesn't come from shouting louder. It comes from being needed. And in 2025, more nations are showing they can walk away. China is no longer waiting for U.S. permission. Canada is no longer asking for exemptions. Allies are looking elsewhere, and they're finding options. What Trump promised as strength is starting to look like isolation, and the world is moving on, with or without the United States.
that Canada's new government will do several things. First, we will take a series of measures to stabilize our domestic steel market and prevent harmful trade diversion arising from current trade tensions.
When President Trump raised tariffs to 50% on Canadian steel in early June, the blow was immediate. Within days, exports collapsed, jobs were cut, and one of Canada's most tightly integrated cross-border industries found itself severed from its biggest customer. This week, Prime Minister Mark Carney finally responded, not with threats or retaliation, but with something more calculated, a structural shift, one designed not just to react, but to rebuild.
The trade actions of the United States are further transforming global steel market dynamics and supply chain. Let's be clear. Canada will be one of the countries most impacted by these developments.
The plan starts with a clear message. Canada will no longer be the world's most open steel market. For decades, nearly 2/3 of Canada's steel consumption has come from imports, while over 90% of its steel exports flowed south to the United States. Now, that equation is being rewritten. By the end of this month, Canada will implement strict tariff rate quotas. For countries without a free trade agreement, imports will be capped at 50% of their 2024 volumes. Anything above that will face a 50% tariff. For FTA partners, the cap is 100%, with the same 50% penalty beyond the threshold. A second, more targeted measure aims directly at Chinese origin steel. Any product containing steel melted and poured in China, regardless of where it's finished, will face additional tariffs. With one exception, U.S. steel remains untouched under existing CUSMA terms. This isn't retaliation, it's insulation.
So moving forward, we must diversify our trade relationships. And above all, we must rely more on Canadian steel for Canadian projects.
Rather than escalate tensions, Carney is using this moment to reorient the domestic market. That means investing, not just protecting. The federal government will inject $1 billion through the Strategic Innovation Fund. This money is earmarked for Canadian steel producers to modernize equipment, produce higher-value products, and fill the gaps left by lost U.S. contracts. To support workers directly, $70 million will be funneled through labor market development agreements, covering training and income assistance for up to 10,000 steel employees. An additional $150 million in regional support will be prioritized for steel-producing communities, alongside expanded loan access for mid-sized firms, lowering entry requirements, cutting interest rates, and extending loan terms from 5 to 7 years. But perhaps the most transformative change is in federal procurement. Going forward, government contractors will be required to use Canadian steel in major infrastructure, housing, and defense projects. From shipyards to bridges, the steel that builds Canada will now come from within. All of this unfolds in the shadow of Trump's tariff threats. Canada's position is precarious. A 35% blanket tariff on all Canadian goods is scheduled to begin August 1st, unless a bilateral deal is reached first. And yet, Ottawa has not retaliated. Instead, it's holding the door open, keeping tariffs off U.S. steel for now, while maintaining strategic leverage elsewhere. Digital services taxes have been paused. Canada has engaged in fentanyl coordination. Every move is part of a broader strategy to stay at the table, without appearing weak. Though the Prime Minister has acknowledged that no country has secured a deal with the U.S. free of tariffs under this administration, his approach suggests a pivot. The focus now is not on removing tariffs entirely, but shaping where and how they apply. The likely target is a reduced selective rate, 8% to 10% instead of 35%, with carve-outs for essential sectors like autos, energy, and metals.
Say we will continue to do business with the U.S. That's of the year, but we will also work with new partners or partners that we have not developed commercial relationship as deep as the U.S. one, including, of course, with Europe and key Asian countries.
Canada isn't just responding to a crisis. It's laying the foundation for a more self-reliant economy, one where steel is not just exported, but embedded in national development. This shift won't bring back every job. It won't reverse every lost shipment. But it offers breathing room and a pathway forward. Whether or not a deal is reached by August 1st, Canada has already begun to decouple its industrial future from Trump's unpredictability and place it firmly in Canadian hands.